Thank you all very much for coming. Well, my friends, good morning, everybody. My friends, well, we did it. We did it. We pulled it off, didn't we?
He is the unlikely rock star of British politics, the newly elected Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. And like a rock star, he has millions of screaming fans. Just shy of 14 million, actually. Far more than his rivals, which means his Conservative Party now dominates Parliament, which in turn means Brexit will happen by January the 31st, Boris's self-imposed deadline. But to paraphrase his political hero Churchill, this is only the end of the beginning. It's now time to negotiate the all-important UK-EU trade deal. Politics, it never ends, does it? But is Britain now over the worst? We're going to be asking our panel, including one of the country's top political radio hosts, an MEP for Scotland who's looking forward to losing his job, and a London MP who reluctantly just lost his. But first, how Christmas came early for Boris.
We are just seconds away from the result of the exit poll. Our exit poll is suggesting that there will be a Conservative majority.
He's back as Prime Minister with the biggest Conservative majority since Margaret Thatcher's third election win.
He won seats that even she didn't win.
There were constituencies where, they'd never been Tory.
There's a blue wave that swept down upon the Thames.
This is the turning point, and it is a decisive mandate.
All his Christmases have come at once.
He can now do exactly what he likes.
We will at last be able to do what?
This was the Brexit election.
Brexit is now happening.
This turned out to be the Brexit election.
I frankly urge everyone on either side to find closure and to let the healing begin. Thank you all very much, and happy Christmas.
Well, a Merry Christmas for some, maybe, but for all those who wanted to stay in the EU, this is the nightmare before Christmas. Anyway, time to bring in our panel now, and as promised, we have the popular London radio show host Ian Dale, who supports Brexit. So too does Louis Steadman Bryce, an MEP who joins us from Strasbourg. And back here in London, we have the Remainer Gavin Shooker, who lost his seat in Parliament just last week. Commiserations, Gavin. We're going to come to you in a second. But Ian, up to you first of all. I've been watching the British radio, the newspapers and the TV, and they're all still talking about what happened. They can't quite get to grips with it. What do you think happened?
Well, it's quite clear what happened. A lot of die-hard Labour voters switched to voting Conservative for the first time in their lives. And a lot of the British media didn't see this coming, particularly the BBC, which concentrated on interviewing London-based Remain supporters rather than getting out into the north of the country and the Midlands and talking to people who were very disillusioned with the way that the Labour Party had acted over Brexit. In 2017, the Labour Party promised to ensure that Brexit happened, but they've gone back on that and let down about 5 million of their supporters. And a lot of them switched to the Conservatives for the first time, and that gave Boris Johnson a massive majority.
Louis, how do you explain the result?
I think Ian's absolutely right there. For people back home in the UK, people are sick to death of the Brexit issue. This has been going on for 3.5 years. And Boris was coming forward, he was taking decisive action, and the Labour Party failed to do that. I couldn't tell their position from one day to the next. And so people just got very, very confused with that. And I think that's why they left in their droves and voted for the Conservatives in a way that we've never seen before.
Gavin, what about you?
Rare note of agreement from, I think, all three panellists on this. But let me add something else. You know, in politics, nothing doesn't beat something. And Boris Johnson had something to offer, which was, we will, in quotes, get Brexit done. Now, I might have questions about where Brexit goes beyond there, but I think that's pretty clear. He was up against a Labour leader who was reheating 1970s policies, who was very unappealing on the doorstep. And I'm afraid in a first-past-the-post system, this is the result you get.
And the Liberal Democrats had something very clear to offer, which was we're going to stay in the European Union, and she actually lost a seat, the head of that party.
Yeah, I think actually even die-hard Remainers like myself felt it would be deeply undemocratic to just pull up stumps and say the referendum had never happened.
Yeah.
Those of us that are campaigning for a second referendum had a clear path through there, but it required the Labour Party not to look like it was dragged to that position, kicking and screaming.
That's a really
And I'm
good point.
afraid
In some of those
what people
debates,
thought.
I heard people say, you know, I want to Remain, but actually the Liberal Democrats' position is undemocratic, so I'm going to vote Conservative. Ian, you were broadcasting throughout election night. What was your favourite moment?
My favourite moment. I'm not sure there was one. I mean, there were several seats where you thought, wow, I can't believe that seat has gone from Labour to Conservative. Redcar in the North East, I think, would probably be the most emblematic moment of that. A seat that was dominated by steelworks at one point, had virtually always been Labour. It did go Liberal Democrat not that long ago once. But nobody ever thought that Redcar could ever become Blue Car, and that's what it did on election night. And there were one or two other of these moments. Blythe Valley, again, a die-hard Labour seat. Durham North West, Laura Pidcock, who had been tipped as a successor to the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, she lost her seat. She's out of Parliament now. So there were many of those kind of moments throughout the night.
You know, we're going to head up north in just a moment. But before we do, Louis, I want to ask you about your job. When the UK leaves the EU in January, you're going to be kicked out of the European Parliament. Just tell our viewers why that makes you so happy.
Well, I came into this originally thinking that I was going to be here, or hoping that I was going to be here for around about 3 months, so I was fully aware of that. So this additional time, you know, I've stuck here with it, and but I'm excited that we are finally leaving. Now, I didn't come into this as a politician. I'm a businessman back in Scotland, but also as a citizen, I felt compelled to get engaged in this debate because I couldn't stand by and do nothing while I watched our democratic rights being overturned by the European Parliament and Remainers.
Louis, we're going to come back to you in just a moment to ask you what happened to the Brexit Party. I know you're not a member anymore, but still. Let's take a look at the numbers really quickly. The Conservatives took 365 of the 650 parliamentary seats to secure an overall majority, while Labour was left with just 203, meaning the Conservatives enjoyed their best night since Margaret Thatcher was at the height of her powers in 1987. While you'd have to go all the way back to before the Second World War to find a worse performance from Labour. Now, the colours you just saw there are opposite to the United States. In the UK, the Conservatives are blue, the left-wing Labour Party is red, and so when analysts say the Conservatives broke through Labour's red wall, they mean they won seats in the north of England and elsewhere. Traditional Labour seats, including Tony Blair's old seat of Sedgefield, which has not been Conservative for 84 years. Well, we paid the place a visit to meet Blair's former agent, John Burton.
I'm John Burton, and I was Tony Blair's agent from 1983. He lived with me for a year and a half. My daughter said she gave up her bed for Tony Blair. She slept on the floor in another room. He was a member of the family. Keith! John! Come on, good to see you again. This is Keith, close friend of mine, and who was the photographer we always used for Tony and for the Labour Party. When Tony won in 1997, it was very special. And the television was going red down the first 90-odd seats, and there was no Conservatives.
It's one of the occasions you're never ever gonna forget, you know.
There's one with Tony and I, that was just, that was held in the club, that was rather nice. President Clinton, and that's Lily as well, my wife. Well, it was a mining area, round this area, a series of mining villages, all solid, rock-solid Labour. I didn't ever realise that this Sedgefield would become Conservative.
Personally, I think it's down to Brexit.
Yeah, it's
simple as
Brexit.
that.
People buy into the whole foreigners coming to take their jobs, you know, that Brexit will be brilliant.
I think people were just fed up with the whole thing for 3 years.
We could cope with Brexit, but we couldn't cope with Brexit and Jeremy Corbyn. The two meant we would lose. Well, we've got a Tory MP. We'll have to see what the Tories do for Sedgefield in the future. We'll wait and see.
Let's go back up to Gavin now. He used to be a Labour MP before Jeremy Corbyn took over. Gavin, we'll talk about that in just a moment. But if Tony Blair was still in charge, do you think things would be very different?
Yeah, I do. I suspect, and I'm not a Blair up, my politics is soft left, but I suspect that he would have been in the running to win a majority this time round. Absolutely, Brexit played.
What would he have campaigned on?
This. Well, I think he would have campaigned for us to have a second referendum and to remain. But this is, in a sense, the problem. Everything actually harks back to Jeremy Corbyn's lack of ambition on Brexit back in 2016. Ever since then, the Labour Party has been playing catch-up, and people did not take him credibly and seriously.
Why did you leave the party?
I had a disagreement fundamentally on anti-Semitism, on the position on Europe, on the culture of the party. But fundamentally, I couldn't, with any integrity, go into this election and advocate putting Jeremy Corbyn into number 10.
So you ran as you ran as an independent, and you were beaten by the official Labour Party candidate.
Yeah, that's right, in my home seat, which is heartbreaking. But actually, what I would say is I reflect many former Labour voters in feeling that they are Labour in terms of their values, but couldn't bring someone that is such a threat to national security and put them in number 10.
Tony Blair's now saying that if they don't recenter themselves and stop pandering to the far left faction of the party, they're going to be out of power for a very, very long time. You'd agree with that? So who would you like to see replace Jeremy Corbyn?
I mean, to be honest, some of these people are my friends and colleagues, but I don't see any of them that have yet stood up and said what was wrong at this election. And if they don't get that analysis right, then the Labour Party won't only be out of power for the next 5 years, it'll be out of power for a decade.
That's what he's saying.
Just to add, the key thing is, the reason why they're not being honest is that they know the only way to win this Labour Party membership is by going out there and praising Jeremy Corbyn. And that was key to my decision of realising this isn't just about the man at the top. It's at every level of the Labour Party now that's been captured by the hard left.
Louis, it was a terrible night for the Labour Party, but for the party you just recently left, the Brexit Party, well, they didn't make any headway, did they? They didn't win a single seat in the UK Parliament. What went wrong for them?
I think that really, the people across the UK realised that the only viable choice in this election was to vote for Conservatives. I cannot, state strongly enough the impact that the Brexit Party has had on this, and in particular Nigel Farage. I genuinely believe that without Nigel, Boris wouldn't be in number 10, and we wouldn't be facing Brexit now. I think that sense prevailed. People realised that it had to be Conservatives, and this is why we've returned the massive majority that we can see has happened here.
I'm tempted to ask you, why did you leave the Brexit Party last month?
So I took a decision based on my personal values. I felt that the party was potentially making some bad decisions and just going in a direction that I didn't want to follow. So I took the sort of decision to step away from the party, and I felt that I could better represent the people of Scotland for however long I'm in this role for as an independent MEP.
So what happens to your charismatic leader, or the leader of your former party, let's put it that way, Nigel Farage now? Does he go to the United States and become a Trump advisor? What happens?
I think there's a lot of speculation as to what Nigel will do. I know that he has already said that he's looking to relaunch the Brexit Party. I'm not quite sure whether that will be as a political party or as a pressure group, but I think he genuinely wants to see that Brexit is carried out in a way that most of the people that voted for Brexit want to see it carried out.
Well,
I have confidence in the early sort of steps that Boris has taken, that we will see a more firm approach to these negotiations, which I think is what the people in the UK want.
If all goes well, Louis, you and the other British MEPs are going to be kicked out of the European Parliament. The Europeans going to miss you?
Do you know, I've actually been invited to a party by the French in January. They're holding it in London to celebrate us leaving. So, yes, I've made a lot of friends here from a whole host of nations. And a lot of people come up and say, we are sorry that you're leaving, but we're actually pleased that you've got what you wanted.
Ian, let's get serious for a moment here. Let's talk about the next big challenge for the British government, the UK-EU trade deal. What is the timetable for that now?
Well, That's a very good question, because Boris Johnson says that it has to be completed by December the 31st, 2020. That's when the transition period ends. A lot of people doubt that that's possible because most trade deals take a lot longer than that to arrange. But of course, we do start with complete convergence. We have a free trade deal now, so it ought to be simpler than other trade deals to do, because all the EU needs to decide is, well, which bits of the free trade deal they want to keep and which they don't. And then you have negotiations over that. But a lot of this has to be agreed by June or July, because that's the time when the transition period could be extended or not. But Boris Johnson is actually going to introduce a law that would prevent him from extending the transition period, which is a slightly strange thing to do because the decision is his anyway. I think the most likely outcome is that there'll be some sort of skeleton deal agreed by the 31st of December 2020. It won't be fully comprehensive. There'll be some things that they put in the too difficult basket and they negotiate after that. But to those who think that there are going to be huge tariff barriers on the 31st of December, I doubt that very much, because we have to remember that the EU exports to Britain far more than Britain exports to the EU. So our market is actually very, very important to them, and they won't want to see any disruption to the trade any more than we do.
Well, let's hope everyone's as pragmatic as that then. Thank you, Ian. Boris Johnson says it's time to heal the country, but the thing is, as our producer from Belfast keeps reminding me, the United Kingdom's made up of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And not everyone wants to leave the EU. With Boris and the Conservatives enjoying a massive parliamentary majority, it appears Brexit is definitely going to happen. And to celebrate, the Prime Minister organised a full English breakfast for party colleagues the morning after the election.
Let's get Brexit done. But first, my friends, let's get breakfast done.
And English is the key word. Brexit has big support throughout England, but what's going to happen to the rest of the UK? The electoral map of Scotland turned yellow on election night as the Scottish National Party took nearly every seat. They're totally opposed to Brexit and they want independence from the UK. So Scottish eggs could be off the menu. The Welsh beans might be safe for now though. Wales supported Brexit back in 2016 and again in the election last week. But Northern Ireland can't be taken for granted. People there are nervous Brexit might leave them worse off and increase tensions in the province that suffered 30 years of violence. For the first time then, more nationalist MPs were elected there than unionist ones. The fact is, the meat of Brexit support is to be found in England, and the government will need to work hard to make sure the UK's other nations don't feel excluded. Back up to Louis now. He's an MEP for Scotland for another, 6 weeks or so. What do the Scottish want? They want to stay, well, the SNP we know, they want to stay in the European Union but have a vote to possibly leave the UK. Is that it?
Yeah, that's kind of the long and the short of it. And I think this is a very confusing position for a lot of people, you know, in Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom, because, of course, Nicola Sturgeon is advocating an independent Scotland whilst looking to take independent Scotland back into the EU and to be subject to all of the EU's institutions, which is nonsensical. And this is why we have a conflict within her own party, because in the last referendum, there was about in the EU referendum, there was predicted to be around 400,000 people from the SNP that voted to leave the European Union. And those are what we would categorise as the true nationalists that understand that an independent Scotland, a truly independent Scotland, would need to come out of the EU. So you've got a major conflict going on there. But I think the important thing about this election is that when we look at the map and we can see how well the SNP did, over 1 million people in Scotland voted to leave the European Union, 1.6 million voted to remain. So what we're seeing is that this election was very much about Brexit. I think that when we move forward to the Holyrood elections, which are coming up in 2021, we will see a very different map being drawn in Scotland when people start to focus again on domestic issues, which we know the SNP have consistently failed in.
Ian, do you think that Westminster will grant Scotland another independence referendum?
In the end, I think they'll have to, because Nicola Sturgeon has quite a compelling argument. She won the last Scottish parliamentary elections on the basis that they would demand a second referendum. She's just won 48 out of the 59 seats in this general election with the same demand. There are Scottish Parliament elections the year after next, where they will stand on that again. I can't conceive how a British Prime Minister can really, in the end, just keep saying no to that, because what it does is it just splits opinion for more and more. In some ways, you could argue it would be a good idea for Boris Johnson to grant that referendum right now. Say, OK, you can have it in March. Yeah. Do it really quickly, because the polls show that the majority of Scottish people do not want to leave the United Kingdom. And it is a bizarre argument. If you want Scottish independence, and yet you want to stay in the European Union, as the SNP do, that there is an inner conflict there. And we should also remember that more people in Scotland voted to leave the EU than have ever voted for the SNP in a general election. So we keep being told, or the SNP try and make us believe that Scotland is united in wanting to stay in the EU. 38% of Scots did actually vote to leave. And as Louis just said, 400,000 SNP voters did as well.
You know, one man who just can't accept it's over is the Stop Brexit guy who's been screaming Stop Brexit at the top of his lungs around Parliament for the past couple of years. Even the Prime Minister now is asking him to put a sock in it. But will he listen? Well, we went to meet him.
Boris Johnson! When you stop lying, we'll put a sock in it!
I'm Steve Bray. We formed a group back in August 2017. We've been here every day the Parliament's sitting. It's not a job, it's a passion. And we're here to protest, originally to stop Brexit, but now we need to carry a different message. There are no winners here, we're all losers. There are millions of people all over the country distraught at this result. Remainers, you know, don't lose hope. The battle isn't over. We haven't left the European Union yet. It's what deal Boris comes up with and how the European Union receive us in the new format. But the campaign to get back in has already started.
You can shove your Brexit up for us.
In his acceptance speech, Boris asked me and the Remain groups to put a sock in it. When he stops lying, we'll put a sock in it. In other words, never.
Stop Brexit!
Bit late now, possibly. Let's go to Gavin, who used to go to work there all the time. Presumably you went past that man every day.
Every single day, and I'm never getting that time back in my life.
And the strange thing is, you wanted to stop Brexit, didn't you?
Yeah, I didn't have quite the same costume, though, did I? No, my issue was always that I didn't believe Boris Johnson had a mandate for the kind of Brexit deal that he wanted to put to the people. There are a couple of ways you could solve that. You could have a referendum where you pit Remain against it, or you could have a general election. And actually, he's been decisive in that. We know that we're going to be leaving the EU now on the 31st of January. We just don't know where we're going, and we don't know what the shape of that trade deal will be. And my fear, just going back to your previous package, is Scotland and Northern Ireland voted to remain in the EU. On every level, this deal will make us poorer, and it will also make us more likely to split up the union.
Gavin, is it now time, though, as the Prime Minister said, for Remainers, and particularly him and even yourself, to put a sock in it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I accept we're going to leave on the 31st of January. I don't think it's fair, though, to say to the 48% of people that did vote to remain for very good and very sensible reasons that we don't get to have a say about where we go as a country, which is why I hope Boris Johnson's going to deliver a deal that gives us the closest possible alignment with the rest of the EU, who are our natural friends and allies, not necessarily with the United States.
Ian, isn't it great how when politicians lose their seats, they become so reasonable and approachable and normal?
You know, the thing is, if Gavin and a lot of his colleagues had voted for Theresa May's deal back in March, when they could easily have done so, we probably wouldn't be in this situation at all. And I think one of the great things about the election result is that we never have to hear this awful phrase anymore, people's vote. we're not going to have a second referendum now. That question is absolutely settled. But I do agree with Gavin in that one of the tasks of the government, of Boris Johnson, over the next few years is to try and bring the country together. Now, nobody's ever going to agree wholly about what comes out of a trade deal. I think there will be some more alignment with European regulations than I might personally like, but that's what happens in negotiations on trade deals. You have to compromise. You can't go into a trade deal negotiation just sticking your foot in the ground and saying, well, we're only going to go this far. There will be compromise, and I hope people on the other side of the argument can actually buy into that.
Louis, last question for you. I know your satellite window is running out pretty quickly. I've heard on the radio a lot of these Brexiteers going around gloating. You're not going around gloating, are you?
No, I'm not actually. You know, I'm proud that I played a very small part in this journey in my time in the European Parliament. But I truly do believe now that it's time for all political parties to come together to heal the country and to stand behind our Prime Minister, because we need to make a success of Brexit and look towards the future. We've all had enough of this. It's time to move on to the next chapter.
Well, Louis, you get the last word. Louis, Ian and Gavin, thank you very much for your contributions to the Nexus, and thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Remember, you can see this and all our previous episodes on our YouTube channel. Till next week then, goodbye.